Parental gratitude, with meaning. 1. Within the womb, 0 Lord of good, was that lump in hand, this humble self, who but thou, kind one, nurtured it into life. Ordered by thee, all comes about. Thus knowing, this thy servant, to thee now surrenders all. This opening verse sums up the whole position in regard to spiritual progress and the various factors involved. The fetus represents the personality of the seeker or aspirant, as conceived in his most primal simple form without any of those attributes belonging to the world of expansion or action. In the intimate negative recesses of the mother's womb before birth, the self or the ego subsists in direct relation to whatever draws it out into life manifestation. In this process of life manifestation there are 2 poles. There is the self and there is the conception of a providence, an ultimate or God conceived as a light, perceptual or actual. Kindness or love is a value that fits into this process as its natural counterpart. Kindness is of the same stuff as bliss or self-knowledge, while piety or devotion are but words which are soaked in the essential content of kindness, mercy or compassion. When viewed without the asymmetry of a bias towards the subjective or the objective, without the prejudices attached to the triputee, the 3 elements of contemplation, we have a central notion called mercy or kindness, which covers an essential human value of a spiritual or contemplative order. This, regarded as the kind care of providence, is like the parental concern of a father, and may be called the father, as a spiritual factor. The conscious contemplative conceptualization of the ultimate or supreme pole of the self. Immaterial and invisible, subtle or subsisting, rather than merely existing. This kind one marks the principle which presides over or dominates matter, which is merely inert or negative. It is the touch of this principle or the relation to this pole which enables the whole of life to regulate itself in progressive stages of self-realized self-expression or unfolding. Between these 2 poles thus marked out, the whole phenomenon of subjective or objective life becomes comprised. Pious surrender is but the recognition of this verity. That lump in hand, Brahmanda, the cosmic egg, in Vedantic writing, has for its antinomy its microcosmic material counterpart reciprocally in Pindanda. In this cosmological context, this latter term is not merely the conventional ball of rice that is offered to ancestors in ritualistic Vedic ceremonies, but represents figuratively the substantial material principle of cosmic reality. Pinda has here been rendered as a lump in hand, which would then correspond to microcosmic aspects of reality as implied when the human personality is considered ontologically in terms of cosmic relations. With what exceeding love, who but thou, kind one, nurtured it into life. The treatment here of what and who, side by side, as if the difference between them was negligible, suggests that the generosity of the Supreme can be treated personally or impersonally. The pronoun does not make any fundamental difference. There is no limit to the implied generosity, and such an absolute and limitless bounty cannot be attributed to anything but what touches the essence of the personality itself. Ordered by thee, all comes about. This phrase seems to indicate determinism, or a God who directs and designs all according to an inscrutable will. When viewed existentially, there is a law of necessity in nature. This law of determinate necessity of the world of relativity is never abolished as long as the least vestige of duality is supposed to exist between the Supreme and the Self. As this prayer is addressed here to the idea of the Lord of Good Bhagavan, i.e. with good as a supreme human value, determinism shifts, in a greatly extended sense, to merge, almost, into the domain of free will. The law of determinism itself becomes a principle or criterion of pure reason. An imperative will of goodness, culminating in reflection and self-knowledge. The object here is to present and explain this mode of operation of the free will in relation to the actual, realistic aspects of life. Such a treatment is meant to make extreme idealism realistic at the same time. Bhagavan has been rendered Lord of Good, as the root Bhag would indicate. Pindam, as we have said, is applicable also to the bowl of rice offered to ancestors in Vedic ritual. In the Upanishads, the bowl of rice has been further equated to the self or the absolute in formulae such as Annam Brahmati, etc. 2. Of earth, water, fire, air and ether too, from each gathered, and firmly shaping in the palm, who confines me within a cell with blazing fire alert, even from the oppression great of such a feminine divinity, protect and nourish me in thy nectarine immortality. Here the allusion is to the negative principle which is elsewhere referred to as Maya. As long as positive spiritual progress is conceived, we must also postulate for it something as its negative aspect. Although in the consciousness of one who is fully established in non-dual wisdom this negativitat, as Hegel would call it, has no place. If the positive principle of spiritual progress is to be Purushottama, the Most High God, then the negative aspect of the same principle, which is finally to be identified with that positive principle, as wisdom gains ground, is justly to be called Maya, the feminine counterpart of the same. Like the female Parvati and the male Parameshvara of Kalidas's opening verse in his Raghuvamsa, they are ever united as the word and its meaning. Every god in Indian mythology and iconography has his Shakti, or counterpart of manifestation or becoming. This Shakti is the creative urge, which is not merely a supposed abstraction of the intellect but something here on the existential side of truth. The Guru refers to this aspect as something to be transcended, however great its claim may be to be recognized as subservient to the methodology of the Advaita. Maya is not a reality but an inevitable epistemological and methodological necessity, to be used until self-realization establishes the full flood of silence in the absolute beyond words. Suffering, sin and evil are all correlated, and dependent factors arising out of this concept of the negative side of reality in Maya. They all mean the same when viewed symmetrically, without prejudices arising from our angle of vision as between the cosmological objective or the psychological subjective. The good is the nectar that nourishes, while evil is the poison that corrodes the spirit as negative attributes in the gross, inert world of bondage or necessity. Earth, water and the other elements are considered here as stages in the descending gross manifestation of the negative principle. Although the modern materialistic and scientific view of the elements seeks to arrange them round a scheme of periodic laws, the Guru adheres here to a scheme belonging to the contemplative dialectical outlook of the Vedanta, the aim of which is mainly to resolve a finally persisting duality in terms of unitive comprehension. Advaita, non-duality, Vishishta-Advaita, non-duality of the specific, and Dvaita, duality, all imply a recognition of this double character in various degrees. For purposes of methodological or epistemological emphasis or explanation of one or other of the aspects of reality, viewed from the personal level. A detailed discussion of the Vedantic theory of manifestation of gross inert matter as we see it in nature, which is called Panchikarana, deserves close attention in the light of this implicit dialectics. This we shall undertake later. In the meantime we shall merely keep in mind that the reference in this verse to the elements being gathered into a lump needs examination for its own proper merits, quite apart from the modern notions of physics. It requires discussion as a part of the contemplative discipline, as Vedantins have always done. Who confines me for baking within a cell? The cell here can be understood from any of the different ways of regarding reality. Biologically, life begins in a cell bounded by cellular walls. Psychologically, the cell represents the limitations of the narrow necessities of conditioned life. Cosmologically, the cell is that particular space-time system into which mind and memory are inserted or fitted, in relation to the rest of the universe. An object is subjected to gravity, while gravitation as a principle applies to the universe, which can be conceived in terms of electromagnetic or thermodynamic worlds. Whatever the theory, there is something which can correspond to the cell mentioned here, in the sense of a limiting context of the here and now. With blazing fire alit, this would naturally correspond to the counterpart of the cell. Energy, described for example as electromagnetism, is like a fire, and this, psychologically, would be the fire of consciousness itself, the consciousness of otherness. The pure consciousness, which is itself unlimited, seems to accommodate at its other pole, so to say, its own limited or conditioned aspect. The duality which is the cause of suffering is compared here to baking. The incubatory process in the fetal state within the womb is actually comparable to subjection to such a slow process of heat as in a baker's oven. The oppression of the feminine divinity is balanced by the protective nourishment which the positive principle represents. We suffer and seek happiness, thus involving the same polarized elements indicated here. One yields place to the other in any spiritual progress at whatever level it may be conceived or formulates. Amritu, nectarine immortality, like Soma, the heavenly juice of Indian myth coveted by the Devas and Asuras, the good and evil spirits, symbolizes a common human value. This neutral or central value of good is like food, saving life from death, which latter is negative, representing suffering. When scientists say that the entropy of the universe is tending to a maximal state, and that food represents a negative entropy, using thermodynamical language, the same positive and negative sides are involved as here.